remember to turn on the recording so we can have a video of this to share with others. Welcome, everybody. I'm delighted to be here with you again and to see you all, even if it's only your names in boxes. So welcome back. The situation just continues to get more interesting, doesn't it? We've had so much going on. So let's get right to this. I'll try to get through the U.S. and the state elections, and we can talk about what happened and what we think might happen next. So I'm gonna share screen off and on because there's some stuff I have to link to that I couldn't put in the PowerPoint. So forgive me if it's a little clunky at times. I shall do my best. Oh, let's see. Well, none of those are going to work. Hang on there. All right. You would think after 3/4 of doing this, I'd be quicker, but I'm not. So, the election is over mostly, but just to underscore the results there, you can see this is from about 3 days ago, and in a minute I'll show you the latest one, which really hasn't changed much. Joe Biden won both the popular and the electoral votes, got most highest percentage of popular votes in 50 years, more popular votes than anyone before. Clearly, Trump has won Alaska. It appears that Biden has won Georgia. Their Republican Secretary of State says, look, the recount isn't going to change anything. And as it turns out, probably Trump has won North Carolina. Just to be clear, there is no voter fraud. There is no evidence of it. Most of the secretaries of state in this country, who are the top elections official in every state, are in fact Republicans, and they're all saying, look, there was no voter fraud. This isn't going to change the results. And frankly, Trump could win Pennsylvania and Georgia, and he still would not win the election. There's all kinds of speculation about why he is so desperately trying to hang on to the office, ranging from, well, if he is unelected, he may go to jail. I don't know whether that's true or not. There's certainly a lot of people who are after him for various problems. He doesn't like losing. I gather he didn't really enjoy being president, but he doesn't like losing. One of the things he's apparently saying now is that he's going to run again in 2024. I would expect that his moment will have passed by then, but don't trust me. I've been wrong about this, I think, from the start. As you can see from the map, why Maine and Nebraska have stripes in them, that's because in those two states, they award 2 electoral votes for the overall winner, and then the remaining electoral votes they award by congressional district. So in those two states, you had 3 votes for Biden in Maine and 1 vote for Biden in Nebraska. So let's stop that share for a moment. I want to bring something else up here. Another map which has been kind of interesting to me anyway all along. You may have seen this already, but here we go. So if we look here, we see pretty much the same numbers. Biden won in the West and the Northeast and the upper Midwest. Trump taking the typical Republican strongholds in the mountain states and also in the South. Interesting that Georgia flipped. Well, Georgia's, Atlanta is a big and growing city, and sort of that's where the population is tipping. And so it is slowly evolving. Somebody I was reading described this as sort of the red mirage followed by the blue wave. Well, they were counting a lot more votes in the large urban areas, and so those results tended to come in later, and that's why some of these states started out as appearing to be in the Trump column, but ended up voting for Biden overall. So if we look here, the other thing I like about this particular map is just that it also tells you what's going on in Congress. And of course, that's very important. It would appear that the Republicans are likely to maintain control of the Senate by, potentially the slimmest of margins. So there are two independents in the Senate. They will undoubtedly caucus with the Democrats, so that would give them 48. So what's left is two runoff elections in Georgia, where you have two different Senate seats that are up for election this time. They may very well split based on the earlier voting results. It looked like one of the Republicans was ahead and one of the Democrats was ahead. So I would not be surprised to see it come out 51-49. In that case, Mitch McConnell is still the Senate Majority Leader and will be one of Joe Biden's greatest challenges as president. So in the House, the Democrats have managed to hang on to the majority by the bare minimum. It was a record turnout year in the state and across the country. And here's sort of the evidence of that not only Democrats came out to vote, but also Republicans, which is not a bad thing. Donald Trump got 50,000 more votes in King County than he got 4 years ago, which is a fairly astonishing number considering overall how unpopular he is where we live. So that meant that Republicans did better in a number of races and areas than they did 2 years ago. I never had the sense of urgency that I sensed from Democrats in 2018. So while they campaigned very hard to get the presidency, and certainly they campaigned hard for other offices, there wasn't that sort of surge of energy that came along with the midterm elections. So divided government is our likely result for at least the next 2 years. And that will be a challenge in particular for the Democrats because it puts the Republicans in a position of just saying no. That being said, you should expect to see that Biden, when he's finally in office, will be issuing a lot of executive orders saying we're going to do this now, which of course the Republicans will say, oh, that's wrong, even though Donald Trump did that. And Republicans will also rediscover budget deficits as an issue. Apparently, it's not an issue when you have a Republican president to have budget deficits, but oh my gosh, there's a Democrat in the White House. Budget deficits are the first step to communism, socialism, and Rockefeller think tank one worldism, right? Along with the death of the Republic. So there's that. So let's stop that share. Let's see. I have other things to show you, of course. And in our state, we get one new member of Congress. We had let me bring that back up, in the 10th district south of here, where Denny Heck decided not to seek a sixth term in Congress. He apparently got worn out by it. So Marilyn Strickland, who was the sort of the centrist Democrat candidate, former mayor of Tacoma and former head of the Seattle Chamber of Commerce, defeated the allegedly progressive candidate Beth Dolio, until recently a state legislator. And this is what seems to be happening a lot, is that despite the people who call themselves progressives, and I don't think they're terribly progressive, but I think they picked that name because the Republicans had managed to make liberal a dirty word. So now they call themselves progressives. They have very little in common with the progressives of an earlier age. And since I'm sort of a linguistic purist, that always bugs me. But anyway, the progressives aren't winning. AOC in New York is sort of the exception, not the rule. So in our state, progressives did not do well either in legislative races or in congressional races. So Strickland won slightly less than 50% of the vote. There was a pretty big write-in vote, 14% for a guy named Marty McClendon, who was unsuccessful candidate for lieutenant governor in the primary. And so when I was looking this up, I found this picture of a little in-home campaign rally for Mr. McClendon, and what do you think the first thing I noticed was? Nobody was wearing a mask. So that's kind of where some of those folks are at. In the other race of note, in the 3rd district, Carolyn Long attempting to unseat Jamie Herrera Butler. Again, Long did worse every time. Her highest vote count percentage was the 2018 primary, and then she did worse in the general, and she did worse in the last primary, and then even worse in the general election still. So the Republican turnout was coming up, and despite campaigning aggressively and raising a lot of money, she couldn't make any headway. So Butler will be back again. All the other congressional races in the state were as to be expected. Adam Smith, our own guy, handily reelected once again. So still 3 Republicans from Washington state and 7 Democrats. Nothing changed there. So now, again, I told you about this guy a couple sessions ago. Now, insurance commissioner regulates insurance in Washington state. Mike Kreidler has been in office like since before medicine. He's the longest serving state executive in the state, 20 years, more than that. And a good guy. I mean, he talks to me. That's sort of my tiny world, right? If I can get the guy to call me back, he's okay. Patel, as I mentioned, said a lot of crazy things. He was going to split the office with his primary opponents, including Kreidler, and he has a spiritual connection to Ronald Reagan and Thomas Jefferson. And his voters pamphlet statement is just sort of, oh my gosh, where's he coming from? Well, here's the amazing thing to me, and I'm going to stop this. This is where I have to sort of juggle screens, so forgive me. Okay. This just shows you that some people are determined to vote Republican, because here's a guy who's clearly incapable of probably doing this office. All right. I don't know him. I presume he's a nice man. Clearly he has some issues. Kreidler in an interview judiciously put it, he has some unusual ideas, but he still got 34% of the vote. Now, considering that many people may not know what it is that the insurance commissioner does, it's not like it was a protest vote against Kreidler. It just sort of seems that in some parts of the state, some people are just determined to vote Republican. I'm sure I've told you the story. A guy from my neighborhood here in Des Moines who ran for state senate some years ago, who turned out to be a mental patient, nice and essentially harmless man. People I talked to who know him said, oh yeah, he's a nice guy. He ran for state senate, and he said stuff like the Russians had tried to shoot him with a laser rifle, and he knew it was the Russians because they're the only ones with a laser rifle, and it bounced off his belt buckle, and they wanted to do him in because they couldn't stand the thought of the Son of God becoming president of the United States. He said these things. They were published, and he still got 30% of the vote. So I just find this kind of result curious because in practical terms, if nothing else, I think I look at that and say, okay, can one of these guys actually do the job? I might vote for him, but that's just me. Call me silly because I am. So let's see, what else have I got to show you here? Let's go back. Kim Wyman, now the only statewide elected Republican official on the entire West Coast. There are no other Republicans in any statewide jobs in Oregon, Washington, or California. She was fairly handily reelected. She's done a good job as head of the elections. I mean, the only thing she didn't do that Gail Tarleton criticized her for was basically trash Trump. And considering that she knew she had to get Republican votes, I don't exactly fault her for that. She did defend our vote by mail system. She's been active in helping to make it work. And so she got reelected. The legislature loses Tarleton's expertise, which I think is not a good thing. I guess Democrats thought they could pick that seat off. On the other hand, in the other race where you had a Republican incumbent defending his seat, Mike Policiati beat Dwayne Davidson fairly handily. He'll be fine. He'll be fine. His criticisms of Davidson were not also terribly apt, saying he wasn't going to meetings. Well, they were frankly meetings he didn't need to go to. He dropped his early criticism that Davidson was invested in things that he was investing state money in. That's because he has mutual funds. I mean, if you have mutual funds, you're invested in everything anyway. So we get a new state treasurer, and I'm sure he'll do fine. But once again, his expertise in corporate law and corporate crime is lost to the legislature, and at least for the benefit of the state, I think that's not necessarily a net gain to have him in a statewide office. But my students and I a couple of years ago figured out he was running for something when we heard that he was speaking to a group of voters in Spokane. I thought, okay, he's running for higher office. And indeed he was. I thought it would be attorney general, but then Bob Ferguson didn't leave because Jay Inslee isn't the president. So Superintendent of Public Instruction, the incumbent, Chris Reichdahl, won fairly handily against Maya Espinoza, a nonpartisan office, but don't kid yourselves. Reichdahl was a Democratic state legislator, and Espinoza is pretty clearly a Republican. The issue that she tried to push on Reichdahl was, of course, the subject of Referendum 90, the comprehensive sex education bill, and she said stuff like, this measure is going to require schools to teach sexual positions to fourth graders. And of course, there's nothing like that in the bill. And as we'll see, statewide voters were basically not fooled by that. Bob Ferguson, Attorney General, once again, fairly handily reelected. Larkin was a Trump supporter, and that's not going to play well in the populous parts of the state. Same thing here. Pat McCarthy, pretty easily reelected. Also, Hillary Friends, also pretty easily reelected. So there's that. Now, Lieutenant Governor, which is more important than usual. You may recall sort of the one official duty is to preside over the Senate. Mark Elias, the progressive, Denny Heck, sort of the centrist Democrat. And Denny Heck won. There was once again a fairly serious Republican write-in effort. Joshua Freed, the mayor of Bothell, who unsuccessfully ran in the primary for governor, tried to squeeze in there through the back door. Got close to 20% of the vote. So I mean, clearly there were some people there who were determined to vote for somebody other than a Democrat. That's fine. So here's the thing. If our boy Jay Inslee does indeed take a cabinet post in the Biden administration, Denny Heck becomes governor. This is not a bad thing. He has a lot of legislative experience. He's also served in Congress. He's been chief clerk of the House, which is sort of the highest civilian official in the body. So, he knows how this works and where the bodies are buried. In some ways, he could be, in terms of pushing legislation, a stronger governor than Inslee, because that's apparently not Inslee's strong suit, is getting in there and getting involved. Not like he's bad at it, but he could be more involved. That's what state legislators tell me. Heck has said if he has to be governor, he will not run for the office in 2 years, as one of you, I think, pointed out last time. In 2022, you have an election for the unexpired term of the governor. Republicans are hoping that happens because they think they'll have a better chance of winning back the governor's mansion. But we'll see. Inslee says he won't take a Biden cabinet post, but as several people have said, look, if the president-elect calls, you should probably at least listen, since he is so passionate about climate change. If he's offered a post where he can maybe try to help do something about that, I would be surprised if he's not tempted. He's a bright man and clearly not without ambition. So there's that. Meanwhile, sort of the as I understand it, one of the steepest losses ever by a Republican gubernatorial candidate, former police chief Lauren Culp, got about 43% of the vote, which is quite remarkable, I think. So you may disagree. Not qualified to be governor, no political experience, never served in an office, and clearly doesn't understand how politics works. Let me tell you why. A few days after the election, at which point Culp is complaining that there were voting irregularities. I don't think there were any. He's just saying that. I think he was surprised that he didn't win, and that says something right there. And then he was let go as the police chief of Republic. Well, and he said he was surprised by that. Here's what happened. He took a leave while he was running for governor. That's good. But, they just simply brought in on contract somebody from the Ferry County Sheriff's Office, which is probably cheaper. I mean, that's what Berrien and SeaTac do, right? They contract with the King County Sheriff's Office to provide police services to the city. Now, they're not on a rotating basis. There's a group of King County Sheriff's deputies who are assigned to each town, and somebody serves as effectively the chief. But be that as it may, I just thought, what did you think was going to happen here? They found they could do this for cheaper, and now you're gone. Who knows? Probably has a brilliant career ahead of him on Fox television. Let's stop that share just to show you how the vote went down across the state. Let's see here. Governor, very good. Yeah, that's these great graphics on the Secretary of State's office. I can't figure out how to sort of copy and paste them. So here it is. If you haven't looked at this, quite interesting, because you can just click on the county and see how they did. This is how almost every statewide election in Washington looked this way. Whitman County, where WSU is, went blue. Clark County, where Vancouver is, went blue. Jefferson, sometimes Clallam, and then, of course, the whole central Puget Sound region. King County, for example, 74% for Jay Inslee, and Republicans say generally if they don't get above 40% in King County, which Kim Wyman did, you can't win a statewide election here. So I think that was the highest, even higher than San Juan County, which is really solidly Democrat, usually also Jefferson County. On the other hand, if we look at Pend Oreille, I think that's where Republic is. Mr. Culp did very well. So in these outlying counties with lower population, Mr. Culp tended to do pretty good, which I find interesting. And the thing that I noticed this time overall, and I think this is true nationwide, and it's, I think, a curious result. You may feel differently, but the poorest parts of the state voted Republican. And that's true across the country. The poorest states in the country voted Republican. And I'm thinking, so what have they done for you? Now, the other thing that this says to me, and I think this is a very serious issue, is that Democrats do not do a good job of helping or supporting rural people. So these are people who are farmers, and they're involved in resource extraction, and they're kind of at the mercy of the economic winds, right? These are not software bajillionaires. So really, I think, and I'll be surprised if this happens because they're so often so silly, the Democrats need to think about these issues, right? What is it that we can do to help these folks out there who are important and who maybe need a leg up? As one state senator was telling me when I was doing some research earlier this year, He heard a member of the legislature from the Democratic Party get up and say, well, farmers don't pay taxes. Well, sure as hell they do. So there is this disconnect between the sort of the two different Washingtons. And while the majority of the population is in the blue Washington, those other folks are also important. And if we want to have a political system where people sort of get along once again, I think we have to think a little broader and a little deeper about the various groups of people who are in the state and what do they need, right? Certainly, poor people in pockets of Western Washington, but also, people maybe who aren't doing as well in Eastern and Southern Washington. So that's something to think about here. Let's stop that share. And you can see this. I got one more of those to show you, I think. Let's see here. President, vice president looks very nearly exactly the same, right? As the governor's race. Pretty much the only difference here is that Clallam County went blue and every other place voted for, the majority voted for Trump. So, and Biden did just about as well in King County as Governor Inslee did. Apparently, one of the biggest differences in the state and nationwide is that there were a lot fewer third-party votes. So the Libertarians and the Greens and the various other fringe parties didn't get nearly as many votes in 2020 as they did in 2016. So, which I think is a good result, because it's like, really, vote for somebody who has a chance to winning. You making a statement isn't actually helping the political system. That's just my bias. The reason that we have a two-party system, in case you've ever thought about this, and on social media I see this all the time, we need a third party. We have a two-party system because of the nature of our elections. And the nature of our elections is that the sort of the first past the post, it's winner take all. So if you get the majority of the votes, then you are the winner, and that encourages only two parties. Multi-party systems in other countries, you have some version of proportional representation. So it would be as though if the Libertarians got 6% of the votes, well, they'd get 6% of the seats in the legislature. Usually there's a floor, there's a cutoff. And despite what, people seem to assume that this would be better, I honestly think it would probably provoke even more polarization, since we're Americans, and by golly, I need to get mine all the time, and to heck with you. So that's a challenge that we continue to face. So, but as I said, same result as a perfect parallel to the gubernatorial election. So then finally, referendum 90, which Republicans had hoped would be a wedge for them. Let's see if we can bring that up. Here we go. Different color scheme, but remarkably similar to what we've seen so far. There again, the only difference here is that Walla Walla County voted for referendum 90. As I said a few weeks back, 2/3 of the school districts in the state are already using this curriculum. So it's not like a revolutionary thing. The arguments against it would be, well, there should be parental control. Parents can pull their students out of this. Nobody has to take this curriculum. A great chunk of it has nothing to do with sex. It's sort of common sense health education. And as you could see, it was approved fairly strongly. So they had gathered, a record number of signatures to get it on the ballot, but the voters did not go along. So there we go. Going forward in our state, things we have to sort of pay attention to. Well, The state still is facing a $4.5 billion budget shortfall, and that's because our tax base is so sensitive to fluctuations in the economy. And of course, COVID has greatly reduced economic activity. It's gotten a lot better. Several months ago, they were kicking around a number like $9 billion. And so it may continue to improve. But of course, now that we're in the middle of this second surge of COVID-19, all across the country, governors are sort of pulling back and saying, hey, you can't really gather in big numbers anymore. The other side of that, though, is that apparently what's driving this second surge is private gatherings. People are having too many parties with too many people in them, and so we'll see what happens with Thanksgiving. You're all smart people. I'm going to trust that you'll be safe and here next time we're back together. But other people are not necessarily paying attention to this. I always wear a mask at my gym, and frankly, at this point, I'm wearing it for myself because you can't get into the gym without a mask. But once in there, there's a sizable number of people who just take them off and don't wear them, and it's all about them, I guess. So it's important for us to be safe out there, right? As I said before, one of the issues that the legislature will think about, and in Washington, that means we're at the start of a many, many year process, because this is the land of process, right? Doing something about the tax system, which is terribly regressive, which is to say, poor people in this state pay much more of their income in taxes than do wealthy people. If we simply adopted Idaho's tax system, the state government would bring in $8 billion more a year. As I pointed out before, Idaho's sort of, hardly a bastion of liberal politics, but hey, they have a capital gains tax, right? I mean, they have some other things that sort of help the tax system track gains in wealth. That's still an uphill battle in this state because people seem to think that if there's any kind of income tax, the government will simply come in, perform a total cashectomy, and remove all of your money right away. And we have voted down income tax after income tax over the many decades since the state Supreme Court rather curiously decided that income was property and you had to tax it all at the same rate. So anyway, that's my spiel in 30 minutes. I'm looking at my notes here. I think I've covered everything. I'm certainly hopeful that you will have questions. And let me say once again, how nice it is to be here with you. So what else can I tell you, gang? Yes, Suzanne, you'll have to unmute yourself there.
Unmuted.
Very good.
Thank you. I have two questions. One of them I should know and don't, and that is who assumes the office of lieutenant governor if Inslee takes the cabinet and Heck moves up to be the governor?
I'm going to guess. I'm going to make an educated guess, okay? That the new governor will be able to appoint someone who will have to stand for re-election or election as soon as possible. But I don't know that for a fact. You guys are too smart. I won't lie to you. In fact, you guys are the ones who looked up and found that in fact the new governor would have to run in 2022. So
there is no chain of succession.
There is for governor. I don't think there is for lieutenant governor, and it's difficult for me to imagine that Kim Wyman, third in line to be governor, would give that up, Secretary of State, to become a lieutenant governor who has almost no formal duties. I think she likes her job. So
my second question has to do with Mr. Biden and his preparation to assume the presidency. How impaired is his preparation by the withholding of briefings and all that stuff?
Yeah, excellent question. some, but not as much as you might think. Apparently, what they're doing is reaching out to the many, many people that Trump has recently fired and asking them what's going on and what are we doing and what do we need to know. And I would expect that lots of them are quite happy to help. So yeah, they're not actively seeking to speak to anybody in the Trump administration, but they are finding people who can help them. As others have noted, he's got a lot of people with a lot of experience, and he's been vice president, so they are should be better prepared to take over the office than some other folks like the current occupant. But anyway, um, so yeah, they sort of have a plan that nobody is saying is not working at the moment. So there's that.
Would you comment on the rumors about what all Mr. Trump plans to do to protect himself in the remaining days?
I don't really know. You know, that's not something I that's not something I'm sure I can say anything intelligent about. Like I could say anything intelligent anyway, right? Clearly he doesn't want to leave the office. Many Republicans are saying publicly and many more privately that he lost, right? He's going to have to go. And hopefully it doesn't come down to riots in the streets till he leaves the White House. And I was sort of thinking about this today, and I thought, well, it doesn't all depend on the White House. If nobody simply listens to Trump, he could stay there. We could get a nice house for President-elect Biden, and he could just start working as president, because I'm thinking a lot of the apparatus of the federal government would simply listen to him, while Trump stamps around the Oval Office and complains. So I don't think it will come to that. It certainly is concerning to see somebody claim without basis that widespread voter fraud and I'm still the president, and it's strangest political time in my lifetime. So, and yours too, no doubt, right? Nothing like this has ever happened before. Yes, Joe. You'll have to unmute yourself there, Doc.
The Georgia Senate race, are we going to have a nonstop kind of campaigning right up into January?
Oh yeah, I think they're already hard at it, and the runoff election is in early January. Like I said, just looking at the numbers as they are now, I would expect that David Perdue will get reelected, but I'm not sure that, I think her name is Loeffler, will get reelected. She was trailing pretty badly in the vote. So that, I gather, was a primary somewhat like ours for governor, when they had 29 candidates. Apparently there were just a whole lot of candidates on the ballot, and the Democrat guy whose name escapes me and Loeffler came away with a plurality. So nobody came away from that primary with a majority. So it's still a bit up in the air, but the Democrat candidate did pretty well. So I would not be surprised to see him win. And yes, they will campaign very hard, since control of the Senate somewhat hinges on this. I mean, if the Democrats take two seats, then you have it a 50-50 split, and the president of the Senate will be, of course, Kamala Harris, and Moscow Mitch will have to play ball for a while there, I think. So.
A question that goes along with that. Do you think that Biden has the chops to compete with a Republican Senate and get his program going?
He's a very experienced member of Congress, so that's in his favor. So he sort of knows how this works, and he's able to work with a variety of people. Mitch McConnell, if he plays true to form, will just be as obstructionist as he can be. But then again, that also means that's the only card in his arsenal. And so I expect that Biden will not wait as long as President Obama did to figure that out and just start, issuing more executive orders and sort of moving the policy pendulum that way. I think Biden's greatest challenge will be from the left of the Democratic Party, who will whine and moan and complain that everything isn't going their way all the time. And I keep telling people, you can be right or you can get something done, and they're not always the same thing. So better to get something than nothing. So we'll see. But I think Biden is well situated to work with and around Congress, if the case may be. So another question, John. I think you had a question there, or
Do you think there's anything to the idea that we hear on the news now that Trump could excuse himself from any convictions that he might face?
he asked. That was sort of one of the early amazing moments of the Trump presidency, was when he apparently actually said, "Can I pardon myself?" And which I thought was simply stunning. I have no idea if that's possible. I don't think so. Be that as it may, and that would be a very difficult thing for Biden. But, one of the ways to sort of dislodge him from the White House might be to say, look, you can go free. And of course, that would enrage a lot of people, much as happened to Gerald Ford when he pardoned Richard Nixon, which I believe you were all there for that, right? I don't know. I kind of hope that doesn't happen. Simply because I think we need an accounting of all the things that were done wrong during this administration. I keep hoping that at some point people will become convinced that a presidency like this was not worth it, that this was not actually better for anybody but the 1%. But we'll see. I don't think he can pardon himself. I would not be surprised to see him sort of try to work a deal. I'll go quietly if you ensure that doesn't mean a straight trip to jail. But even that would not protect him from all kinds of civil lawsuits and state level lawsuits. So hard to say. Good question. Good question. Other questions. You guys always have good questions.
Yeah, this is Jean.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, is there really any concern that we should have for the deficit or the national debt?
Well, it's big right now, isn't it? There's two things that could happen. And that in effect do happen. Now, Republicans have said for generations that budget deficits crowd out private borrowing, so that businesses are not able to borrow money because the federal government is sucking up all the available capital. There's no evidence that ever happens, and you buy government debt because it's safe, not because it pays real well, and corporate bonds are probably paying much better. So I don't know how that could happen. On the other hand, every dollar we spend servicing the debt is a dollar that we can't use for something else. And as this most recent round of debt was largely to provide tax breaks to people who frankly really didn't need them, that's an issue. It's not insurmountable, given that the government could probably, without too much difficulty, increase revenues. Now, of course, there we have Senator McConnell to get around again. But if you could just get rid of the Trump era tax cuts, you'd have a lot more money coming in, and you could use some of that money to buy the debt, which is relatively cheap, and then just retire it. But I've been advocating that since George W. Bush cut taxes for no apparent reason in 2001, and just buy back the debt, surrender it, and then hey, there's your deficit. Historically, Republicans have run up bigger debts than Democrats do. I'm not making this up. And so at least under Biden, we should expect that the deficit and the debt will subside to some extent. So we'll see. In the long run, yeah, a huge deficit is not sustainable, but we have such a huge economy. We can take a few hits and still keep playing the game. I'd prefer to see it smaller too. And I'm not sure why the wealthiest Americans need lower taxes. The system made them pretty wealthy as it is.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Ray, did you have a question?
Yes, sir. Can you comment on the future of Obamacare in the Supreme Court?
Well, what I've read recently is that it sounds like it will not go away, that the Supreme Court will not overturn it. So it will continue. I think in the long run, we need to do something else. I think universal basic health care would be such a benefit to the country. And in particular, small business. I mean, think about that. It puts small business on a much more even playing field with large business because their benefit packages won't be so terribly out of whack. And I think that's sort of an overlooked benefit of having a basic medical care plan. If you let them negotiate for drugs and whatnot, they would have enormous leverage with medical suppliers. So that would be a benefit. It was unfortunate that George W. Bush, when he pushed through the prescription drug benefit, which I'm sure many of us are happy for, he did not allow Medicare to negotiate with the drug companies on prices, which was just criminal. The VA, Veterans Affairs, gets to negotiate with drug companies on drug prices for their healthcare system, and they pay a lot less. So if you can sort of harness just the overall buying power of a national healthcare system, you could do something to moderate the costs and still make people more productive, so that they're not waiting until the last minute to go get healthcare. It would also mean that a lot of people who lost full-time jobs when it was required that if you had somebody working so many hours a week, you know how to give them healthcare. Well, lots of businesses simply cut people's hours, so they didn't have to do that. And if those folks can, somebody working one job, even at a low wage, is still better off than somebody working two different jobs at low wages. And I know people like that, right? We see people like that in the community. So I really hope that gets addressed. Will it happen with a split Congress? Yeah, that's the $64 billion question at the moment, but it should be possible. I mean, it's something to work toward. And it's something that Mike Kreidler said when I was speaking to him earlier. He said, well, there are probably things we can do to improve the Affordable Care Act. So even short of getting a national health care plan, we might still continue to make improvements to what we have. But what I read is that it sounded like the Supreme Court is at present, following the most recent arguments before it, unlikely to just overturn the whole thing. So good question. Other questions?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Joe.
During the campaign, we heard very little about all the great things that Trump did during his presidency, and what stuff we did here was nobody could verify. Are we ever going to find out what kind of a president he was? What did he get done? He was good for the country.
I think we will. I think we will. You know, when apparently Republicans are still scared to death of him, and so people are not talking who might. But I think if he is no longer president, some people will begin to open up and say, "All right, this is what actually happened," and so I expect over time we'll know more. And in the long run, historians long after you and me will probably look back and go, "What the heck was that about?" So, other questions? Yes.
Why do you think the Republicans are so afraid of Trump?
Well, because he has a very loyal base of voters, right? And in some states that can get you elected or unelected. And on occasion, you know, a Trump supporter upends an incumbent who is not necessarily a Trump supporter. So he has. He still has a lot of clout, and that's one argument about why he's trying to so hard apparently to stay in office. It's not because he expects he's going to stay in office, but this keeps the base agitated and loyal. If he just gives up and walks away, some of them will simply be disappointed and leave, and then they'll look around for something else. Interesting, the number of Republican secretaries of state across the country who are basically I think the Secretary of State of Mississippi, as a Republican state as you can find, right? Apparently told the president's people, go jump in the Gulf. You know, we're not overturning these results. They are accurate and fair. So other questions, if I answered that.
You did. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So
Yeah.
can you hear me?
Yes.
It occurred to me this morning that the control that Trump has been trying to inculcate into his followers reminds me, and I was very young at the time, of the Nazis in the 1930s. And total mind control seems to be his goal. And the responders often express that, not a majority, but there's a significant minority who favor that.
There are apparently I mean, I'm not surprised, sadly, about the amount of racism that Trump has enabled. I am surprised to some extent at the number of people who apparently don't really think that democracy is a good idea. You know, they're not really concerned that the Republicans are sort of pushing for an authoritarian government, right? Where elections, in essence, don't matter. And clearly, in many places, they are. You know, all the efforts to keep people from voting. You know, in Texas, they limited the ballot drop boxes to 1 per county, and Texas is a huge state. So you know, they're doing things that suggest that they're not interested in people voting except if they're going to vote for them. As I said on a previous time we were together, way back in 2016, before the election, before even Trump was nominated, I showed a political theory class a film about Mussolini, and I just said, "Who does that remind you of?" And they all said Trump. So maybe not a Nazi, but certainly he looks like a fascist in some of the things that he says and he does. Now, I'm sure he would deny that. On the other hand, I mean, who are the world leaders that he appears to think are good, right? Putin and Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un, you know, dictators, every one of them. So he's not of the usual American tradition. My theory about this is that because average wages have been stagnant for so long, going on 50 years, that people are not doing better by and large, except for the richest people. And I'm not against the rich. I just want to see more people share in this, that they're angry and that leads them to look for one, someplace to blame. Trump gave them someone to blame. He said it's government, it's the Democrats, it's etc. It's gays, people of color, immigrants. I mean, everybody he's demonized, right? So really, if the Democrats want to be in power for a while at least, that's an issue they need to address. You know, they need to find a way to lift up the bottom so that if people live comfortable lives, I believe they will be less concerned about immigrants and people of color and the poor and the homeless. I mean, they'll be more generous of spirit. That's my theory. I have no way of proving that, but you will note that in wealthier parts of the country, people do better, right? They have better lives. They have, you know, better sort of quality of life scores. I mean, it's like school districts, right? If you adjust for income, school districts with relatively high incomes, family incomes, their students do much better on tests. Well, they get enough to eat and their parents have time to pay attention to them. So those are issues that need to be addressed. But yes, you are not the first person to describe this either as a cult or as in essence sort of a heavy lean towards fascism, which is no fun to watch. So
Thank you.
yeah, good question. Anything else there? Well,
I have one more.
oh yes, please.
Are you encouraged by the fact that Jill Biden is a community college professor?
Yeah. I don't really know what she teaches, you know. I think it's great that she is actually an educator, and you know, you would think if she was like really awful at it that would have come out. So I have to presume that she's a good professor, or was if she's no longer teaching. Uh, you know, look, you guys listen to me once a month. I mean, and I don't actually know anything, so I'm not sure that her being a community college professor is necessarily a recommendation. On the same general subject, I will be very glad to see Betsy DeVos no longer be Secretary of Education, because she clearly has no feel for it, doesn't like public schools, and just the wrong person in the wrong job. So that in itself will be a net gain even if they don't replace her. Just let her walk out the door and let the staff take over. So.
Well, my understanding is she is going to keep on teaching
Oh,
this language.
oh, okay, all right.
To students. So I just thought that was encouraging for.
Yeah, sure. Wow, that's going to be tough. You know, I mean, your husband is president of the United States and you're still trying to hold down your job. I mean, you know, I think if my wife were still alive and she'd somehow become president, I'd have probably taken a step back from teaching, because I'm thinking she's going to need my help. So for whatever that might be worth, but good for her. Wow. She's made a tougher stuff than me. That's not hard, but still that's impressive.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Presuming we get to talk again, you got any ideas about what you might like to hear about in the future? Yeah, Suzanne, or you have
One
another question?
question.
Sure.
Would you care to comment about what the future holds for the Trump children?
Well, what? Maybe jail, you know, that's a possibility. I feel really sorry for his youngest son, Barron
Oh,
Trump.
yes.
You know, he did not ask for this, and here he's got this kind of crazy family, and you know, his mom clearly dislikes his father. One of the theories there is that as soon as he's out of the White House, she's gone. I don't know whether that's true or not, but you know, that poor young man. Any child deserves better than that. I mean, what classic picture I saw recently, Trump going up a stairway into Air Force One, and he's holding an umbrella, and his poor son is 10 feet behind with no umbrella, just kind of hunched over in the rain. And it's just like, really? this is your son, you know, you owe him that. Take care of the poor chump. So, did I say anything that answers your question there? I'm just
Well, sort of.
sort of. Go ahead. Tell me again.
I had in mind the older children.
The older children. Yeah. I don't get the sense that without their political connections that any of them would be particularly good at business. And since their father is pretty clearly not actually that good at business, their name will carry them a little ways, but it's I don't know what they'll do, you know, because I mean, I wouldn't want to hire them unless I was extremely conservative and thought, you know, that having their name affiliated with my firm might be a good thing. And then probably there's somebody out there like that, but you know, without Daddy in the White House, Ivanka's probably not going to get quite so many trade deals with China for her line of whatever the heck it is that she sells. So it's
Thank you.
yeah, good question.
I have another question.
Yeah, sure.
I was out shopping today and there's hardly anybody in the stores. And when I came back, I kept thinking that the only economy keeping any country going is China. They seem to be sending their things over here, and anything I purchase is made.
Yeah, yeah. That's been kind of their goal all along, was to sort of be the workshop of the world, and you know, so far that's seems to be working out okay for them. China faces still some challenges in that they need to be more of a consumer-based economy than a production-based economy, simply because the Chinese state's legitimacy still rests on constant economic growth, and that's simply unobtainable.
Interesting.
You know, yeah, that nothing grows forever, right? So and you know, they will sort of try to keep this going as long as they can, because that, I mean, it's not the communist ideology anymore. They're really not communists, but their growth rates will eventually start to fluctuate, and they will have down periods, and there will come a point at which the government can just sort of no longer dictate economic results, and that could be very disruptive to the society as a whole. Optimistically, I and some smarter people than me hope for sort of a soft landing where China adjusts, becomes a little bit more liberal, and there are other ways to let off steam. So I think part of what you're witnessing too is that, especially under the pandemic, probably a whole lot more people are shopping online.
Well, I know that's true.
Yeah, yeah.
Very depressing.
Yeah, it is indeed a challenging time, but you know, I mean, it would just be lovely to be out and about again and see people, and you know, but obviously we've got to get through the pandemic first, and that just looks like a little longer road than I ever expected. But then I'm not an expert on this. I mean, I thought when we left school at the end of winter quarter last March, I thought, oh, we'll be back by the middle of spring quarter. Well, we're not back next quarter, and I'll be moderately surprised if we're back live in spring at this point. So that's just another hurdle we have to overcome.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Good question. Other things, my young friends? All right, then. Well, it's just great to see you all once again. Thank you so much for coming. I hope you got something useful out of this. You know, I will hopefully be back with you sometime soon. We can chat more. You can let Doug or Joe know if you've got something you want to hear about. Give me a little time to work up something there, and I'll be glad to talk with you then. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. Yes. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Eat lots of turkey.